34% of our household assets in deposits with banks. If we could channel even 5% of that, could make a difference of just under 2 trillion productive capital that is deployed within the EU. Companies have to have the oxygen of capital markets to invest in growth and innovation.
Good evening and welcome to this special episode of The Big Question, our new business series. I'm Angela Barnes, Euronews' new business editor. Now, please, can I welcome to the stage our guest, Francesco Ceccato, the CEO of Barclays Europe. Francesco, it's a pleasure to have you on this special edition of the show live from Brussels. Now, with the economy, of course, there is a lot to talk about. But to set the tone, let's start off by talking about, first of all, the current state of the economy in Europe. Now, according to the IMF's European outlook for 2024, it will be a gradual recovery this year. As prices decline and wages increase, Europe's consumers are starting to recoup that purchasing power. Of course, that's going to differ across the bloc. But in your view, is Europe really at a turning point?
Yes, I am optimistic. I think we do have reasons to believe in a brighter outlook, and inflation is falling, and it's falling fast. But the trend is very clear that wage growth has taken place, and so there is clearly a lot more spending power and a lot more disposable income in the European Union. I think with this backdrop, there's going to be an opportunity for the ECB to begin its cutting cycle. We expect that to begin in June and likely to cut at every meeting up until January of 2025. So we expect the deposit rate to go from 4% today to about 2.5% then. And I think, if you like, that combination of having a strong employment foundation, based on all that, we are expecting perhaps the first half of this year to be still relatively stagnant, and the second half to see a growth, incipient rebound.
This year, 76 elections, including, of course, Europe. That's around half the world going to the polls, which equates to around 4 billion people in 76 nations. That's really incredible. So the big question here is, how might these forthcoming elections change the business landscape?
Yes, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I think you clearly should maybe ask that question to some of the other people in this audience who might give you a better view. But from my perspective, I see no real game changer on the horizon in terms of the political or fiscal integration of the Union as a result of these elections. And if we believe the polls suggest that perhaps we are moving perhaps slightly to the right in terms of the overall composition of the European Parliament, which would probably make political and fiscal integration even less likely. But at the same time, we do see elections as a time of market volatility from time to time. That isn't all bad. We typically want to think about market volatility as something to worry about. Not every business has that particular component to the way it thrives. Our markets business thrives on volatility. And so if our markets business does well, then we can obviously support other businesses. So I think overall neutral to potentially positive.
The EU is talking about the markets on consolidating capital markets across member states to open up investment opportunities for citizens, very high on the EU political agenda. How do you think that's going? And what further progress needs to be made this year? And as well, just tying in there, if there's any particular avenues EU funds should be directed towards.
Yeah, so I think the Capital Markets Union project and in general sort of focusing on the capital markets has to be one of the top priorities for policy for the next parliament. That and competitiveness. And the two really go hand in hand. And why do I say that? Because companies have to have the oxygen of capital markets to invest in growth and innovation. And there is a point at which you run out of the ability to continue to fund growth and fund innovation if you're just looking at founders' capital and bank finance. So being more deliberate about the Capital Markets Union is essential.
And Francesco, the European Commission has also been very articulate on its mission to improve financial literacy among young people and among Europeans generally, and has published several frameworks to help develop national policies. Just how integral is this, and what are your thoughts on the current investment mindset in Europe?
I think it's enormous. And the reason is we in Europe have roughly 34% of our household assets in deposits with banks. Harnessing even a small portion of that could be an enormous opportunity to drive growth and innovation. If we could channel even 5% of that, that could make, according to a study that I've read, a difference of just under 2 trillion to the productive capital that is deployed within the EU. So education is very important. It's pivotal because I think education helps people have the confidence to invest. We need to build both the supply side in terms of the investment opportunities through creating better and deeper capital markets, but at the same time we have to create the demand side by having those educational efforts that will give people the confidence to put their money into the capital markets.
Interesting. Okay, so moving away from that mindset, like you said, of investing in property and high interest rate bank accounts into capital markets,
it's not as productive. I mean, and I think the reason it also matters is that we have a changing demographic in Europe, and the old age dependency ratio is something that we need to worry about. Right now you have roughly 3 working age population per every 1 retirement age person, and that is going to probably move to less than 2 to 1 by 2050. So it's really important to be not solely depending on the pay-as-you-go system, but creating the opportunity for savings and ultimately securing the financial futures of people who are of a certain age.
Another task at hand is keeping Europe competitive whilst creating a net zero green economy by 2050 with the EU Green Deal. Well, how can the EU help to compete, or hope to compete, with China and massive US subsidies supporting green industry from the Inflation Reduction Act in the US if member states are unwilling to pool their resources? Do you see this as a big problem at the moment?
I think national policies are perfectly welcome if they ultimately are part of the broader project to reduce emissions by 90% by 2040. That should be the goal. And if we can all look each other in the eye and say the policies that we have at the national level are supportive of achieving that goal, then it's fine for them to be national policies. On the Green Deal versus the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, what I would say is, why not look at what features are potentially things that we can learn from. We have demand and supply side incentives in the US and only supply side incentives in the EU. So these are things that we can look at to potentially see how we can become more competitive.
And on the environmental point, Francesco, Barclays announced earlier this year that it will no longer fund certain categories of new oil and gas fields. What's your view on ESG based on what you're seeing and doing? Have ESG concerns fallen down the agenda, do you think?
I don't think so at all, actually. I think for my clients and indeed for my colleagues, it remains a hugely important topic. And people understand that the energy transition is one of the key topics of our time. and that it's going to take a lot of money, obviously. I think the estimates are about 400 billion to 2030 for the EU to fund its energy transition, and then roughly 550 billion per year until 2050. So these are huge amounts of money. And those clearly are investments that cannot only be done by member states or by the national governments. We need the whole of the industry to buy in to this transition, and that is what we see reflected in our clients.
Francesco, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Question. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. I'm going to let you go and sit down and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.